Hello and thank you for watching again. This is the third part of my commentary on the New Zealand mosque shootings. Some people might say that why am I making such an extensive analysis and commentary on this single incident? My answer to that is that this incident showed how much hatred and evil a person may acquire against Islam and Muslims in particular. It also showed so much disregard of human life and lack of compassion and lack of mercy. This individual basically shot people of different ages. He shot men, women, children, elderly. He showed no mercy, no compassion whatsoever towards them. As I mentioned in my previous commentary, he basically did not feel that he was attacking or killing human beings. We need to analyze and see the reasons and the factors that led to this unbelievable amount of hatred and evil in the heart of the shooter. This is one reason. The other reason is that the way this attack was handled by some Western media outlets shows the extreme discrepancy and disparity between how they provide coverage for attacks committed by Muslim extremists versus the right wing versus this right-wing white supremacist crusader extremist. You can see in some of the newspapers such as the Daily Mail that they describe the assailant as an angelic boy who grew up into a monster. They describe him as an innocent child. They talked about him being a working class man. They talked about the fact that his father died of cancer. They talked about him as a dedicated personal trainer. So they bring all these good qualities about the person. And yes, he might have had all these good qualities, but to highlight these qualities in the context of such a heinous and evil and brutal crime, you are downplaying the gravity of this crime. But whenever somebody of a Muslim faith commits a terrorist attack, then you see that the media always highlights his religious background, that he's a Muslim. This was never highlighted in this attack. The media always highlights his ethnic background if he's of a Middle Eastern background, especially if he's of a Middle Eastern background. The media tries to bring in Islam as a religion, that it is guilty of the ideology that this person has formed, although Islam has nothing to do with extremist and terrorist attacks, as I have clarified in previous talks. You can see the total discrepancy between how they covered this attack in contrast to attacks committed by extremists of a Muslim faith. And this is quite clear. I don't need to discuss this further. Also, another reason I'm making a detailed commentary on this attack is that this attack has actually fueled more attacks. There has been a 597% increase in hate crimes and incidents against Muslims in the UK alone in the week following this attack. There's been actually 95 incidents of hate incidents and attacks on Muslims in the UK alone in the week from March 15 till March 22nd. Also, there's been a rise in hate crimes against Muslims in many other parts of the world. You can see the arson against a mosque in California that occurred on March 21st, that occurred on March 26th. Also, there was a sledgehammer attack on multiple mosques in UK on March 21st, but these attacks were not regarded as hate crimes by the UK authorities. They blamed it on some mental issues. Basically, the Western media has to recognize the big problem that they have with regards to the way they cover attacks committed by Muslims and those committed by non-Muslims. Although this person who committed the attacks against the mosque had a clear religious motivation for his attacks, and this is evidenced by the fact that he claimed to be a member of the Reborn Knights Templar, and that even on his rifle he had carved and written multiple dates and multiple names referring to battles that have occurred between the Muslim world and the Christian world in the past, in the remote past, hundreds of years ago. He actually went back more than 1,000 years ago in some of the battles and dates that he has listed on his rifle, indicating that his attack and his killing of the Muslims today is a retaliation of some of the very ancient battles that occurred between the Muslim Empire and the Roman Empire, for instance, or the Muslim Empire and some of the European armies. This is a very perverted ideology to justify the killing of innocent civilians based on the fact that some innocent civilians of European descent were killed by some extremists proclaiming the Muslim faith, or based on previous wars between Muslim armies and Christian armies, although these wars are hundreds of years old. If I would give an analogy to this to clarify how perverted this way of thinking is, if you look at, for instance, if one of the indigenous people of the Americas went back and looked at some of the massacres committed against the indigenous people by the people of European race, and then he goes on today killing some European people or people of European descent, and claiming that his killing today of those people, of those white people, is a retaliation for a massacre that happened 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago. Wouldn't this be totally twisted and perverted and evil? But this is exactly what this person has done. Also, if, for instance, a black man goes and kills some white people, citing that the white people oppressed the black people and enslaved them hundreds of years ago, and that many black people were killed during this enslavement and this enslavement and deprivation that they suffered from in these days. Also, he cited some of the names of innocent civilians that were killed by some extremists who of the Muslim faith who committed attacks in Europe. This is not a straight and logical way of thinking. Again, this way of thinking would lead to total chaos in this world and total hatred between people, and the killing of innocent people, as we saw in this incident. I would like to cite two studies. One of them out of the University of Alabama and Georgia State University. These are very recent studies that confirm that the way the Western media handles terrorist attacks differs completely based on a single factor. That factor is the religion of the perpetrator. And they've studied all the other factors, such as the number of casualties, the brutality of the attack, and so on and so on. But they found that the number one factor that will determine how extensive this attack would receive coverage in Western media is the religion of the attacker, citing that if the perpetrator was a Muslim, then it would receive 357% more coverage than anyone of any other faith. This is not the only problem. The biggest problem, in my opinion, is that not only that they show such extensive coverage of the attack, but they also link this attack to Islam as a religion and to the innocent Muslims living in the West and even in the Middle East, that they are all the same, that they are all barbaric, they are all savage, and that they all hate the West, and that they are all out there to kill Jews and Christians, which is a total lie that is being spread and perpetrated against the Muslims through these media outlets. Also, the other study is a study a study out of the Noor Cultural Center in Toronto. This again found that if the Muslim was the aggressor or the assailant, if a Muslim was the assailant, then this attack would have received 1.5 more media coverage. Not only that, but the thwarted attacks, the foiled attacks that never took place, those would receive 5 times more coverage in the Western media compared to if the attacker or the assailant was a non-Muslim. And again, the biggest problem is not only the coverage, but that the generalization and the demonization of all Muslims and the linking between the attack and the race and the religious background of that individual. The religious background always highlighted if the assailant was a Muslim. While here, nobody talked about the religious ideology this individual had. They even said something that is so ridiculous. They claimed that violent computer games were the factor behind the radicalization of this individual and him turning into a monster. It wasn't PlayStation games or Xbox games. It was pure hatred. This individual went back to the whole history of all the battles that have occurred between the Muslim Empire and the Christian forces throughout the Crusades and before the Crusades and after the Crusades. He went back and filled his heart with hate because of any attack that has occurred on Western soil perpetrated by Muslim extremists, and he considered Muslims in general as a legitimate target, and he considered Muslims in general guilty of those attacks or of those wars or anything bad that has happened between Muslims and Christians in the past, and that he can take it out on Muslims today. And again, I think I will make another commentary to focus on Islamophobia, and that the Islamophobic rhetoric that is still being circulated in the Western culture, especially by politicians, is the biggest problem. And there has been a steep rise and spike in attacks against Muslims, especially after the election of President Donald Trump, who feels that it is very normal and actually a good thing to demonize Muslims and to call them and to state to the public that Muslims hate the West. That he actually linked between the mosques. He linked in multiple incidents between mosques and death and evil against people of European descent or the Western countries. He said that Muslim people come out of mosques with eyes full of hate and death. He said there's so much hatred in the mosques. Even Stephen Harper, the previous Prime Minister of Canada, he was also strongly against Muslim presence in Canada. One time when he was legislating an anti-terrorism law, he says this is going to be a serious offense if you commit anything against this law. He says, regardless of where you committed out of, whether you come out of your mosque or out of your basement. Again, he makes a link between mosques and terrorism, although mosques have nothing to do with terrorism or extremism or violence against innocent civilians. And Islam as a whole, as a religion, Islam as a religion and the Muslim people as a whole have nothing to do with crimes committed by a handful of people who committed worse crimes against Muslims before they committed crimes on Western soil, as I mentioned in my previous talks. Thank you for watching, and the fourth part of my commentary will focus more on the media bias against Muslims, and also on the Islamophobic rhetoric that is prevalent and has become a normal daily occurrence in the Western culture. Thank you.